Well, this class is Making Money Matters Work in Your Marriage. My name is Chip Roberts. This is my wife, Judy, and we're going to be leading the class today. I hope you've enjoyed the marriage retreat as much as we have so far. Tom and Kelly really are an amazing couple with an amazing story. And we hope this class, too, can be of real benefit to you. We asked you to fill out those brief get acquainted questionnaires to kind of give us an idea of what brought you here to this class today. If there's something that you're currently working on or focused on that we might be able to talk about at some point, we certainly want to make ourselves available too at the end for any questions that you might have. So we're just very glad to have you here. There's several really good quotes about marriage. One in particular, a long marriage is two people trying to dance a duet and two solos at the same time. That was said by someone named Ann Taylor Fleming. Another one is, love is seeking it to act for the other person's highest good. It was said by a gentleman named Jerry Cook. Love is seeking to act for the other person's highest good. Another one's, the difficulty with marriage is that we fall in love with a personality, but must live with a character. Peter DeVries shared that. And one of my favorites was said by Rita Rudner. I love being married. It's so great to find that one special person you want to annoy the rest of your life. So we know that money matters can feel like a real hot topic. And in fact, it really is. It's like a hot fire that can either shed light or burn up the relationship. So giving it the right amount of time and interest is really important, and it's such a key part of our married life, is being able to talk about our finances. On average, couples fight more about money at least 3 times a month than just about any other topic. That makes it the most volatile topic ahead of parenting, chores, work, or friends. People really, when it gets to money, they just start kind of locking horns. And as couples age, they generally argue about money more often than anything, and the most common cause of money arguments, 58%, are focused on differing opinions of needs versus wants. And that whole question of what do I really need versus what do I personally have a desire for or want. Matthew 6:21, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So that's an ongoing battle that we all have, of trying to sort that out. What do I need versus what do I want? Where is my heart? What is my desire, my treasure, that I really have to kind of sort that out continually? 49% of people argue about unexpected expenses, and 32% argue about insufficient savings. That's another big topic for people. What is the savings account look like? Is there a reserve? Is there any plan if there's a problem or a catastrophe? What's our situation? Are we still going to be okay? As Christians, we have the distinct advantage of having God's Word that includes over 2,000 verses on money and possessions. We have the opportunity to have the Word light our paths and shape our conduct, but we need to put it into practice to build our marriages and to handle money God's way. To do that, we need to talk about it, and here's a key point about money and marriage. It's not so much about money itself, but rather about what money represents. So this afternoon, in the time that we have, Judy and I are going to focus on some of the following as it relates to marriage and money. 1, what does money represent? 2, what are the needed skills related to communication and conflict resolution? 3, what is a good fighter? And how can we be good fighters when discussing money? And 4, Judy's then going to be able to share about some principles of good money management, along with a number of practicals in handling money. And at the end of our presentation, we do have an exercise for each of you to complete and discuss with your spouse. So that's kind of the wrap-up of it. But we, like I said earlier, will try to make time to answer any particular questions that you might have about money and marriage in your life. Money represents power and trust and value and dreams. This whole thing about values we'll talk about in a little more detail.
Are you done?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I was going to share a little bit about how we started out. We're married 41 years. We had absolutely nothing. When I say nothing, I mean nothing. We lived in an apartment that it had a space heater in it that was about this wide by this wide. And the living room was about 110 degrees in the winter. And the bedroom and the kitchen were about 30 degrees in the winter. And then I went to the laundromat one day, and I left the clothes in the dryer, and somebody stole just absolutely everything we owned. They stole our sheets, our clothes, our towels. We had nothing. So I learned 2 things from that. Never leave your stuff unattended in a laundromat. And then there are people that have less than you have, and they will take your stuff. Well, I would go to the grocery store. I remember one particular time going to the grocery store, and I had $20 to spend every week for groceries. And I got on the line, and I didn't have enough money, so I had to put some of the groceries back. I have never forgotten that experience. Back then, we didn't have credit cards, which was a great boon for us because we learned how to manage on what we made. So we had a couple in our lives. They were in their 50s, and they sat us down. They kind of discipled us. They were a great couple, and they said to us, "You're living on the wrong side of the town. We're afraid you're going to get killed or mugged, and we think you need to be proud of where you live." And what Chip was thinking is, it was $60 a month. Rent is what we paid. And what he was thinking is he was going to put every extra dime away. A year later, we purchased a mobile home for cash.
Wow.
And then that gave us the footing we needed to move on with our lives. But we learned a lot during that period of time. And there's always hope. I mean, we can all do better with our finances.
As I was saying a moment ago, this thing about, I lost my place here. Oops. Here we go. I was talking about that money represents power and trust and values and dreams. When I talk about power, we have to ask ourselves, who's holding the purse strings? In your marriage, how is financial information shared? How does the power person treat his or her spouse? The person in power may fear losing his control or her control, while the person not in power may fear not having influence in important issues that are impacting their life. What, when, and why are important questions and require great communication. But that's the power piece of it. Closely connected is trust. Can I trust you to handle money in a godly way? Can I trust you to keep agreements that we've made? You said you were going to pay the bill last Monday. Did you follow through? Those kinds of questions. I feel secure that we are communicating openly and honestly about our finances. Is that true? Those are all important questions to somebody that's trying to build trust. And trust doesn't just, it's not one of those, you're starting out very hopeful, very supportive, but that has to be reinforced by the consistent behavior of someone. They want to know that if you're saying you're going to do something, you're going to keep that agreement. You may fear that there's a lack of respect being shown for your values. Having a difference in values requires ongoing communication and a deep desire to find common ground. What are your shared values when it comes to money? Here are a few values that Judi and I share. We both hate debt. Paying interest is like smashing our thumb with a hammer. I mean, it's one of those things that is deeply felt. You really are painfully experience something when you've got to pay extra interest on something that you purchased. We're willing to delay a purchase in order to receive a better price, which we call delayed gratification. Okay, I want it now, or we need it now, but perhaps if we can just make do for a while longer, maybe we're going to get a better price. And that willingness that it doesn't have to be this very minute, that I have to always cave into that I can resist that feeling. We place a high value on teamwork, and we refer to ourselves, and have for some time, as Team Roberts. For each of you, it would be the team that you are as a couple. But it changes your thinking in terms of it's not just about me or just about Judi, but we are making decisions that truly affect us. The very thing that Tom was talking to the men about, the importance of us versus me. We value being frugal and living below our means in order to build for the future. Achieving these shared values has required communication and conflict resolution. Each of us comes from a very different background or upbringing that often affects how you view money. I can't emphasize that enough, because when you come into a marriage, you really are coming in with a lot of preconceived thoughts about what money is, how it was handled when you were growing up, how you've seen other people handle it, the pressure that we get from society, buy, spend. That whole thing of the consumerism is all coming into play as you start your new life as a married couple. And sorting that out is really an important education. There was a few years ago that two counselors, Doctors Les and Leslie, their last name is Parrott, Parrott. They wrote a book entitled The Good Fight that details how a couple can discuss sensitive issues like money in a positive and productive manner. In their book, they outlined an acrostic with 4 elements, and the acrostic is CORE, C-O-R-E. So if you were to write that down the page across, it would read, the C stands for cooperation, working as one. A guy named Robert Dodd once said, the goal in marriage is not to think alike, but to think together. It's a very different statement. Not to think alike. You don't have to be exactly identical in your thinking, but you do have to think as a couple, as one. That's, again, that whole team concept. The second thing is ownership. The O is for ownership, accepting responsibility for your financial action or decision. And the other person, they have responsibility as well. They may say, hey, I had nothing to do with that decision. It's on you. But they do have a responsibility in terms of their reaction, how they respond to those things coming to light and how you talk about those things. So there is ownership. And again, if you're thinking as a team, it's not like this is all on you and I'm the blameless one standing over here, because you know that both those things are affecting that same person or that same couple. So that's ownership. And then there's respect, is the R. And with respect, how do you like being shown respect? For a man, that's a very important question. And we know that from Ephesians 5:33, talks about the importance of respect from a man's wife. What makes you feel most disrespected? And here's some examples. And you can raise your hand if there's one in particular that catches your attention. The person you're talking to puts their fingers in their ears. The wife starts pulling on your tie and pulling you closer to her as she's having a little conversation. The husband rolls his eyes. The wife looks bored and disinterested. How about the husband's yelling? Does that feel respectful or disrespectful? The wife is pointing her finger in her husband's face. You know, the one you see where they're wagging the finger and it's like 2 inches from your nose? Or the silent treatment by each or either or both partners where they're just not talking. I'm just going to freeze down on this thing and I am not talking. All those communicate disrespect. And so we know that as part of that core that we're talking about, core communication, that's a critical piece. There was also something else that these guys did. There was also the final one is empathy, the E being empathy, being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. If you can relate to, let's have an example where the guy comes home and he says, wow, I found a almost brand new table saw at the garage sale and it was only $200. I couldn't pass it up. But the wife had no understanding that he was going to go out there and make a purchase like that. Can he put himself in her shoes of getting that kind of a surprise when you're thinking about buying groceries or paying the light bill and he comes all excited and happy about dropping $200 on a table saw? Not that he couldn't use it, but the question is that really the way to communicate about money? And is that being empathetic? And I'm sure you guys have some great examples, and hopefully we'll have some time to hear some of those, because I do think being able to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes is a really significant thing. How do they feel? How would you feel if you were in their shoes? He also, this couple, the Parrots, in their book, they spent a fair amount of time talking about fight types, and that he describes it as there's a good fight and a bad fight when you talk about money. And a good fight means that you're using Christian principles of good listening and holding your tongue and really thinking about what you're going to say before you just fire off and unload on somebody about why you're objecting. So he spends a fair amount of time talking about that. By the way, that book, The Good Fight, is available on Amazon Kindle for like $4. And it comes with a free app that you can actually put on your smartphone, and it'll give you like helpful hints about money matters in terms of if you're going to sit down and talk about a very delicate topic and you know that there might be sparks flying. It has a way of evaluating how you're going into it. Are you being prideful about it? They have like a pride meter. And you can actually look and kind of inside yourself and say, okay, am I going in with this with the right kind of heart to be talking about something that potentially could be a very hard conversation? So they've made this app available so that you can just immediately access that and ask yourself important questions about whatever money matter you might be talking about. But furthermore, they also get into this whole thing about fight types. And these fight types, there are 4 in particular. There's competitive, collaborative, conciliatory, and cautious. And I'm going to share this information with you. This describes how you typically would fight over delicate issues like money or parenting or sex or work or house chores. It's all kind of talking about the same thing, but of course the big thing that people really have a time with is money. So let's talk about that one. The competitive fighter. See if this describes you. You like to win. You tend to be more expressive about your troubles and less flexible in accommodating your partner's viewpoints. You're goal-oriented and aggressive. You're often direct and to the point. and your desire to win means you can come off as blunt and even tactless. When you're duking it out, your tongue can have a sharp point to it, whether you mean it or not. You may also be impatient, an impatient listener, especially when stressed. In other words, you probably figure out what your spouse is trying to say long before he or she has finished saying it, and you're eager to jump in and throw a counterpunch, even while others are still talking, while she's still talking. When your spouse disagrees with you, it only fortifies your determination to win. My wife will take a stand and stick to it no matter what, a newly married husband told us. She becomes so convinced that she's right that she doesn't spend any energy trying to see my side. I feel like I'm married to a prosecuting attorney. That's life when you're married to a competitive fighter. It's not that you don't want to find a solution. You just want, ideally, for your spouse first to acknowledge that you are right. In fact, you probably don't like to let conflict linger. You want to get it out on the table and find a resolution. Of course, that's not always easy in a relationship that requires compromise. As a person who doesn't struggle with being indecisive, humility may be one of your biggest hurdles in fighting a good fight. As a competitive fighter, you can often benefit from working on the C in the core of a good fight, cooperating to fight for a win-win. So that's a competitive fighter. Now this is a collaborative fighter. You're a team player. You tend to be expressive and flexible. You listen well and love being listened to. The more your spouse listens, the more you feel loved. You're also adept at moving the conversation away from the central issue in order to be as accommodating as possible, especially if it helps to sidestep a tough topic. You're inclined to steer clear of conflict. You can avoid directly confronting the issue at hand, even if your spouse wants to discuss it. You will sometimes bury your own needs and conceal your own desires simply to avoid tension. At times you might even swallow your feelings and wear a smile to conceal your distress. When things get rough, you're feeling especially stressed. You might withdraw from the relationship altogether and resort to sulking. Be aware that conflict avoidance is different than conflict prevention. The former is unhealthy and the latter is not. Chances are you do both. In addition to avoiding conflict by concealing your true feelings, you also prevent potential conflict in your marriage by knowing and avoiding what is likely to trigger the heated disagreement with your spouse. As a collaborative fighter, you can often benefit from working on the E in the core of a good fight, empathizing with your spouse to be sure that you accurately understand what he or she thinks and feels. So that's the collaborative fighter. Now this is the conciliatory fighter. As a person who is less expressive and highly flexible, you strive to be a peacemaker. As a result, you typically are on the quiet side, keeping many of your feelings carefully hidden from view. You probably don't divulge details unless you've asked about them. You approach your conversations with a sense of serenity and calm, and your spouse needs to draw out patiently. If the point of controversy is urgent or exciting, you express it evenly and without heightened emotions. You tend to speak slowly and deliberately. Again, we're talking about the conciliatory fighter. Since peace is just about your highest priority in marriage, you don't experience many external quarrels with your spouse. You keep your conflicts covered up, internalizing your struggles. You rarely, if ever, have emotional outbursts of any kind, and certainly not one of anger. Other fight types may air their grievances and stir up tension, but not you. Conflict for you is to be avoided at all costs. That may mean bearing any unpleasantness that is sure to bring about dissension. It may mean avoiding a particular topic that is bound to cause turmoil. Whatever it takes is fine with you as long as it maintains the peace. So as a conciliatory fighter, you may find it especially beneficial to work on the O in the core of a good fight. owning your piece and the conflict pie of the conflict pie. And finally, this is the cautious fighter. You are thoughtful and guarded. You are less expressive, but also less flexible. You like to focus on the facts, but you'll also probe for the hidden meaning behind your mate's words. You'll often ask specific questions of your partner as you seek to understand an issue at a deeper level. You'll sometimes ask the same question again until you find the reassurance, feedback, and reasons for your partner's viewpoint. In almost all your conversations with your spouse, you need information and time to consider carefully whatever's being discussed. Many of your fights are the result of your feeling criticized or because you read something into your spouse's motivations. Once the disagreement begins, you tend to be very rigid and overly detailed. That is, you may quote what your partner said, even from conversations that you had days or weeks earlier, and cite specific instances to back up your points. Instead of verbalizing your conflict, you may be apt to write a long note that gives a detailed and logical explanation of your grievance. As a tactic, you may also ask questions, much like an attorney, that push your partner into a corner, proving how you are correct and your partner is wrong. This may cause your spouse to feel belittled. You don't enjoy fighting, but you generally keep your wits about you in the process unless your failure to convince your spouse causes you to withdraw in a morose and moody way. As a cautious fighter, you may find it especially beneficial to work on the R in the core of a good fight, respecting your partner to be sure that he or she doesn't feel demeaned. So, those are the 4 types. Did you hear which type you are? Did that come out loud and clear? Sometimes if you're wondering about that, Judy and I have been talking about this. I think the closest example we can give, if you're kind of wondering which type am I, think about going on a road trip together. Of course, you're going to rent a car from Dollar, but the fact is you're going on a road trip. Let's say the husband's going to drive and his wife is going to be the co-pilot or the passenger. Think about what that drive might look like if it's you and your spouse. Are you in complete control in driving, that you know where you're going, you've got the directions, you've got the GPS thing going, you know the road, you've been there before, perhaps it's somewhere new, but you're confident you're going to get your wife and family there safely? Meanwhile, in the passenger seat, your wife, is she sitting there with a blindfold over her eyes and completely trusting you that you're going to get this from point A to point B? Is she sitting there saying, you're following that car too close, slow it down, you're going too fast. Please put on your signal. Can you please stop driving so fast? Which one is it? Can you kind of catch the similarity? Because that really says something about how we drive with our loved one, is kind of an example of what is our fight type. If I think, and I do, my thing has been the competitive fighter was me in the beginning of our marriage. The good news about fighting in these fight types is that they can change. Amen. They can turn into something different, because as you become aware, okay, I don't like being that kind of a fight type. I want to be something different. You can find yourself drawing closer and understanding, importantly so, understanding what your wife's fight type is or your husband's fight type. Because too often we're just thinking, well, this is what I am, but we don't give equal time to, okay, so if I'm this way, what kind of a fight type is Judy, for example? And we would say that about each couple here. So that's a very important piece of this, is to understand that fight type. It's critical to know yourself and know your teammate. Your marriage can only be as healthy as you are. Remember Romans 12:18. And this is a very interesting scripture that I come back to time and again. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And I hasten to add, especially your spouse. And so now Judy's going to share about money management and offering some practicals.
Okay, you have two handouts there. One of them, the first one, are the principles involved in money management, good money management. And the first one is communication. Like Chip was talking about communication styles. So one of the things that we find, and I was looking through these pages here as I was sitting here a little bit, and one thing that I noticed right away is that people don't talk about money and their financial goals as often as they should. They just kind of let it go. So the first thing is communication, where you have teamwork and you have shared goals and visions. In our married life, we have found that we set a goal, a financial goal. Actually, we set financial goals every year at the beginning of the year. And then once a month, we sit down and we look at, are we making progress towards the goal or not? And we make a very specific plan about how to make progress towards the goal. And then we hold each other accountable. Second one is gratitude. To be grateful and thankful to God for what you already have. I don't believe any of us are hungry. We all have a roof over our head. And sometimes we can look at more what we want in terms materially instead of what we already have. So there's four scriptures there. Hebrews 12, verse 28. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe. Psalm 50, verse 23. Those who sacrifice thank offerings honor me, and to the blameless I will show my salvation. 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 18. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Psalm 107, verse 1. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. Now, when you're feeling that the finances are tight, it's not in our general nature to feel thankful. But when we express our gratitude towards God, and I find that if I'm having a really bad day, I list in my mind, or I have a gratitude journal, all the things I have to be grateful for. Gives you a new perspective. Now, this next one is a really big one. And this is what, in working with couples that have had issues with their finances, that we see is lacking in many people's marriages, and that's what we call delayed gratification. Okay, years ago they did a study, and they had a bunch of kids in the room, and they gave them each a marshmallow, and they told them, if you eat that marshmallow, you won't get another marshmallow. But if you wait 5 minutes and you don't eat that marshmallow, we'll give you 2 marshmallows. And what they found from following up with these young adults later is the kids that could wait the 5 minutes for the second marshmallow were the ones that did very well in life. We live in a society now where people want what they want, and they want it right now. Like, we've been married, like I said, 41 years. We find that generationally, like the people in their 30s, 40s, and maybe even early 50s want to have what we have, but they want it at 31. And that just doesn't go. It doesn't make sense. But they go ahead. They don't worry about ever paying for it. They look at it like if they can afford the payment, they can purchase it. Contentment. Sometimes we're always thinking about taking the next hill instead of enjoying the one we're on. Philippians 4, 12 and 13. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through Christ who strengthens me. Hebrews 13, verse 5. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Now, if you have decided as a couple that you want, or you wanted one spouse to stay home and take care of the children and be a one-income family, that is a very, very noble calling. It's also a noble decision for both spouses to decide to work. Okay, that is also a noble calling. The Proverbs 31 woman took care of her children very well, but she also had work outside the home. So both of those are very noble callings. But one of the things that I've seen that really hurts my heart is I have seen where a spouse wants to stay home and take care of the children, but they also expect to be provided with a big home, lots of vacations. There's a sense of entitlement that they should be able to stay home, care for the children, and that also have all these other things. When you make that decision to stay home, like I said, it's a very noble decision. It will emasculate your spouse if you insist, if you're not happy with what they can provide on the one income. And that doesn't glorify God. And I'll never forget Allison Jacobs. It's been about 10 years. Most of you know Allison. But about 10 years ago, she called me and she said, I'm just feeling like I have a responsibility to help out financially. She didn't elaborate. She hadn't been in nursing for like 25 years. Okay? She has a master's in nursing. And she said, what do? I said, well, I really think you need to go back and find out if you can take a nurse refresher class. So she did that. It was either 6 weeks or 6 months, but it was kind of an intense thing. And then she went back to work, and she's still working today, but she had the conviction that she needed to sacrifice for the team. It's very important. Selfishness is highly overrated. So you do the best you can to sacrifice for the team with the situation that you're presently in. Entitlement can be devastating for a lot of reasons. Entitlement is, I've earned it, I deserve it, I owe it to myself to have it. Living the Christian life with feelings of what is owed us, what we deserve, and what we have a right to puts us in harm's way. The entitled personality is a proud one. Most people who feel entitled generally struggle with pride. James 4:6 says, but he gives us more grace. That is why Scripture says, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Ephesians 4:1-3, as a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Now, the last point in terms of principles is, if you're struggling financially or suddenly you have a child in college and you haven't felt like you've prepared adequately, okay? There's two ways to approach this. You can increase revenue, so you can look at yourselves as a couple as a whole and ask yourself, how can I increase revenue in the circumstances in which I presently am? Like, is one person unable to work? Maybe there's something else that they can do that will increase revenue. Another way is to decrease spending. Okay? And you know, it's not as difficult as you think. I think you would be surprised. Okay, so that brings us into the practicals. So the biggest thing we talked about is communication. Like open communication, loving communication, changing your communication style to not be like real aggressive when discussing money, because money stresses people. So to make up your mind that when you discuss the finances, and you need to discuss the finances, it will be in a loving and kind way. So communication is paramount. If you fail to communicate, you're kind of planning to fail because you don't know where your finances are. You need to discuss it more. Okay. Like Chip said, one of the things we hate is debt, or one of the things we've agreed upon is debt. Debt enslaves, it limits your life options. In other words, when you have a lot of debt, it limits what you can do as a family, but it also limits what you can do personally for God. Like, we've had different situations come up in the church that we're aware of, and we like to help. If we had allowed ourselves to get in a lot of debt, we wouldn't have the means to be able to help. And that means a lot to us. Finances are 10% knowledge, 90% behavior. In other words, you can go through the classes, Dave Ramsey and what's the name of that? Crown Financial, okay. But you still have to be able to implement what they teach you. And we've seen a lot of success stories, and we've seen people that had a really difficult time implementing it because you have to spend less. The decisions you make every day regarding your money one day become the summation of your financial health. So you have to talk about it. Just because you can afford the payment does not mean you are making a wise financial decision. What do I mean by that? So let's say you go out and you look at a car. Just because you can afford the car payment that month doesn't mean that that's a wise financial decision. You have to kind of look at, well, what if one of us loses our job? Or what if you can't just string yourself out payment-wise that all you have is the money to make your payments? Browsing leads to buying. Okay, this is a big one for me. You have to know your areas of temptation and avoid them. So in other words, for me, they're my grandchildren. I like to buy a lot of clothes. We'll be, just mulling around, and he'll see the children's clothing store. It's got a big sign, 50% off. He'll say, do not go in there. Because he knows if I go in there, I'm going to spend money. Okay? He knows it. The grocery store is another one for me. I could just walk around and spend a lot of money on groceries. I'm working on that. I try to go now once every 2 weeks. And home, I'll look at a picture and think, oh, wouldn't that be lovely on the wall? So I've learned that, going into places like the home decoration places is not a good thing for me, because invariably I come out with something. So, like I said, browsing leads to buying. Okay, make your coffee at home. All right, if you have 3 Starbucks a week, 52 weeks a year, that's $780. Now, I'm not going to lie and tell you I never go into Starbucks, but I've been in Starbucks, I think, once in the last year with a sister, and we got together there. And I got an iced tea, but it's very expensive, okay? Very expensive. It's the little things that add up, not the big purchases. Invite people over instead of eating out. Potlucks are terrific. You will be thinner, eat healthier, and have more money. Watch the TV less. You will have more family conversations. and conserve energy at the same time. Never purchase expensive items on impulse. Practice what we call the 30-day rule. If you still deem it a worthy purchase 30 days later, go for it, of course with the approval of your spouse. Don't spend extravagantly to entertain your children. Read more. Now, early in our marriage, because when we first got married, I was a spender, he was a saver. Okay. So I went out and I bought an antique table for $350, which was a way lot of money back then. Okay? And so I purchased that table. So after that, we had a rule. If it was over $50 for a lot of years, we would discuss it together, which served us well. We don't do that anymore, but if you're at a point where you need to put those things in practice, I would recommend it. Read more. Use the library for books, movies, music, and magazines. Check out the free days at the museums and the zoo. Brown bag your lunch. This is huge. Okay, if you eat lunch out, you're working and you eat lunch out, the cheapest lunch you can probably get is $8. So when you put the tax on it, you're talking about $11. So if you're looking at 3 days a week, that's $33 a week, times 4 times a month, times 12 months a year. That's the stuff that adds up. Drink more water. Limit pop and fancy beverages. They're expensive. Cancel unused club memberships if you have them. Plan your meals for the week using the grocery sale flyer. Make a list and do not purchase items not on the list. Eat less meat. That'll save you a fortune. Another trick is at 3:30 every afternoon, thereabouts, King Soopers puts out all their meat that has not expired, but it's close to expiring. I will buy a lot of meat out of that little section. Or they have baked goods, bread, significantly less money. This is another big one. Being in healthcare, man, you wouldn't believe it. Request prescriptions for generic rather than branded drugs. If you need a non-generic drug, call all the pharmacies in town and compare costs. And don't assume that your insurance is going to give you the best deal. What I do is my insurance will charge me $50 for blood glucose testing strips a month. I can buy 3 times as many strips on Amazon.com for a lot cheaper. So don't assume sometimes if you pay cash for a generic, you're going to pay less than you would pay using your insurance for a generic. It's crazy. Yeah. Buy in bulk, things like toilet paper, paper towels, those kinds of things. Costco's great for that stuff. Use the online budget tools. Online now, there's tons of budget tools. We got rid of our home telephone. For years, we didn't have cable. I mean years. He wouldn't get it because of the expense it was every month. Now, do we have cable now?
We do right now.
Okay, because it seems like you changed it he was going down out to watch sporting events, and I wasn't happy, so he's got the cable now. Yeah, he was, yeah. We got rid of our home telephone. Agree to limit gift giving, because what we're looking at now is, I still work. Chip has been retired a while. I still work. But we're looking down the road and going, okay, probably in another 5 years, I won't be working anymore. So we want to make sure that we put into practices today that are going to help us then, because we're not going to have the means we have right now with me working. Save your loose change. We save our loose change for a year. And this time of year, in about a couple of weeks, I started rolling it. I will use it to buy plants to plant my pots in outside. And I'll do that every year. So it's kind of like, it's for savings. And then whatever's in there, I can spend on plants. If you are in a really rough spot, use the resources available to you in the community. There are a lot of resources that that are available now that weren't available 7 or 8 years ago. A lot of resources. Drive your car longer. We've always, like he doesn't like car payments. We've always basically driven our cars into the ground. We've driven them into the ground, then we get another car, and then we drive it into the ground. It saves a lot. If you feel like you've got to have a new car every 3 years, it's ridiculous. I mean, really. And people are buying cars, I don't know, but everybody looks at things differently. Like, some people, it's a status symbol, what car they're driving. For me, I just get in the car and I say, thank God it's getting me to work. You know, it's not important to us, but some people that's very important. It's a status symbol. But you pay a lot for that status symbol. You could be doing a lot of other things for other people with that money and for your family. Always keep looking ahead. Ask for help and encouragement from your inner circle. Like in your regions or the friends you have, if you have somebody that you know has overcome their spending, use them as a resource. They would be happy to sit down with you and go over what you might be able to do given your individual situation. Like, there have been women who, I mean, they're just wildly creative, and they felt like they needed to help their families financially. I mean, this one woman took these really sexy looking dolls. Have you heard this story? Yeah. And she cleaned their faces off and painted them. You can't even get them now. They're so popular. She dressed them in unprovocative clothing. She dressed them like dolls that little girls should have, not with all the makeup on. And I mean, she's got this huge business now. We have a lot more options sometimes than we really give ourselves credit for, you know? So, thank you for being very patient.
Thank you.
Well, we certainly appreciate your attentiveness with this class. You know, this thing of finance is something that we all have to continually work on and apply ourselves with. We hope that you're going to be able to use that core communication, remembering cooperation, ownership, respect, and empathy, that you're going to be able to bring that into your marriage. You know, there was a study done at the University of Washington, and they came out with a statement that said, with 94% accuracy, they can tell a healthy marriage based on not whether the couple will fight about finances, but how they fight about finances. That's the key. So don't give up. You've got some great resources within the church available. I want to say thanks to Brian Dunbar for being here. Brian has been teaching Financial Peace University for a number of years. It's a passion for him. Alex is here and has been teaching Crown Financial in the past. Those are two great programs. If you know, you or someone you know needs to get some in-depth education about how to handle money God's way, either one of these programs I would certainly recommend. And there are, as Judi mentioned, the online services like either Mint.com, which is a free budgeting service, or there's one, YouNeedABudget.org or .com. I believe that's a subscription. It's like $60 or $70. But it really, for those that really get into budgeting, really helps. They basically operate on the premise that you give every dollar a job. You don't just have money out there just kind of laying around. Every dollar's got a job, and you put it to work. And for people that get focused, it is amazing some of the success stories that you hear. So I certainly would encourage that. But if there's any questions that you have, anything you'd like to share about your own financial education or experiences that you've had,